Alright guys, the news number 1 for today is the approval of the White House administration for Ukraine to use the ATACMS missiles on the Russian territory. Well, before the approval was given for the standard German-Rest missiles, which Ukraine successfully used against the Russian forces, for example, in Kursk. But as you understand, the range and the effectiveness of the ATACMS missiles is much better. And yes, hello my friends and welcome, my name is Dennis and this is the latest update from Ukraine. Let's go. Well, I really like the news. We were all waiting for this decision for a very long time, but there is also a downside comes with this decision, at least according to the information we have right now. It is still quite limited for Ukrainian army. Well, this is the range of 300 kilometers. As you can see, potentially Ukraine may hit lots of the Russian military bases, their infrastructure, especially in Rostov-on-Don, also in Belgorod Oblast, partially in Kursk. Ukraine may also try to target the Kerch Bridge now. However, again, according to the mainstream articles which refer to the United States officials, Ukraine just got the permission to use ATACMS missiles in the Kursk region. Yet there is still the chance that those missiles will be used elsewhere on the Russian territory for the maximum range, but again, according to the media, Ukraine is quite limited for the Kursk region. It is some sort of the response on the North Korean soldiers group which were deployed in the Kursk region and will be used by the Russian army. So with this restriction, we are not saying about stopping the Russian offensive in the east. Ukraine will be just able to hold the controlled territory in Kursk by hitting all of the Russian supply connections. One more problem that, according to the open information, Ukraine has obtained just a limited amount of ATACMS missiles, mostly with the cluster munition warhead, which helped to destroy many of the Russian airfields with the airplanes and helicopters, but those are quite useless against, for example, bridges. For that you need the standard warhead and many of those missiles. Well, actually, during his last visit, Zelensky asked the United States of America to supply more of those missiles to Ukraine, but by that time his request was ignored. I hope that United States will provide more of those missiles to Ukraine. Ukraine needs not just those ATACMS missiles, but also the platforms from which they are launched. I am speaking about the HIMARS rocket artillery system, because many of those Ukraine actually lost. They were significantly damaged or destroyed. This is the latest video published by the Russian channels, and here HIMARS just moves in a convoy, but nevertheless, as you can see over here, it was hit by the Lancer drone. Yes, the Lancer drones are able to hit even the moving targets, which is quite bad for Ukrainian armed forces. Unfortunately, Ukraine still doesn't have the prompt solution to solve the problem of the Lancer drones. And also Ukraine doesn't have the competitor for the Lancer drone, but we have some of the good news moving in this direction coming from Germany. Guys, just a short message: if you want to support the job that I do on YouTube, you may consider supporting me also on Patreon, because that's how you support my motivation. Then YouTube cancels monetization. Thank you so much for it. One more thing, that the permission from the White House for Ukraine comes very late, before Russia used their airplanes very close to the Ukrainian border. But when the discussion started to happen whether Ukraine should obtain the permission to use the ATACMS missiles on the Russian airfields, Russia moved to the vast part of their aviation away from Ukrainian border, crossing the maximum range gap, 300 kilometers. Now it would be awesome to have even 10% of the Russian aviation within 300 kilometers range. So before Ukraine had the chance to eliminate the great part of the Russian aviation, and I'm speaking about those Sukhoi 34 fighter bombers, which continue to drop the aviation gliding bombs on Ukrainian territory, on Ukrainian military positions and civilians. So Ukraine has no chance any longer to kaput the Russian aviation, and I remember how the Speaker of the White House said that Russia had already moved 90% of their aviation park from the close military airfields with Ukraine, so there is no sense to give Ukraine the permission to use ATACMS on those airfields, but after all, finally they gave that permission. It is a clear definition of the double standards, let's say. Again guys, I'm not saying that now ATACMS is useless, but I want you to be ready that ATACMS will not solve the major issues for Ukrainian army. But there was the time that it could have been a game changer, only if the Western politicians, especially officials of the White House, were not so weak. You see, it is already the fact that Russia is using not just North Korean artillery shells, but also their ballistic missiles plus big artillery systems. Also, Russia has its own Iskander ballistic missiles with a range up to 550 kilometers. Russians also do have the cruise missiles, they have their strategic bombers to launch those. And the terrible thing here that aggressor escalates, it has the initiative. And that small part of the ATACMS missiles which Ukraine already has, Ukraine cannot use without the permission. Basically, Ukraine is forced to fight against a much prevailing enemy, in this case already enemies, with the hands tightened behind the back. Just because our partners do afraid to escalate. Well, if you're afraid, the other side will do it. They will escalate using their unique weaponry. It was fun and at the same time sad to read the tweets from the MAGA group, for example, Elon Musk. Here he commented, "True on liberals love war." Immediately tweeted after the news appeared about the ATACMS missiles. But some tweets were even more impressive, for example from Donald Trump Jr., where he said that the military-industrial complex seems to want to go to the World War III. Marjorie Taylor Greene, you know this Russian puppet, and she also said about the World War III, directly saying about the news connected to the long-range missiles. But all of those freak politicians were silent and were not speaking about the World War III. Then North Korea sent its soldiers to Russia, and they were silent about the World War III. Then North Korea sent artillery shells, ballistic missiles, and then Iran sent its drones to Russia and also want to send ballistic missiles in the coming future. For them, the united dictatorship is fine and they may do whatever they want in Ukraine. But if Ukraine asks for help, whoa, that's the escalation, that's the World War III. And again, even with this permission, Ukraine is quite limited. Well, ATACMS itself is less capable compared to the Russian Iskander. Yes, the Russian Iskander is more powerful, it has the longer range. At the same time, it is more expensive, but Ukraine will have just few of the ATACMS missiles, at least for now. But American politicians are scared. They are scared because Putin scared them. The same Putin that bluffed many of the times. This is the Putin's famous speech at the very beginning of the war. I watched it just a few minutes before I heard the loud bangs near to my house. So there he says whoever tried to stop us and further create threats, that Russia's response will be immediate, that you have never faced in your history. So clearly he threatens, oh this ugly face, with nuclear weaponry. But after some time he spoke with different face, also ugly but not that serious. So after all he says, I want to remind those who allow themselves such statements about Russia that our country also has a variety of weapons of destruction, and in some areas even more modern than those in NATO countries. We will without question use all the means of our disposal. Our disposal, so Russian disposal, really fits to this speech. Yeah, to protect Russia and our people, usual bullshit from Putin. He doesn't want to protect Russia really. He wouldn't have started this war at first. And later he speaks that it's not bluffing, blah blah blah. And his most recent statement, even with a less evil face, where he continued to threaten the West if they provide the long-range weaponry to Ukraine and approve usage of those on the Russian territory. The rhetoric from the Russian officials is the same, and it doesn't depend really on whether allies support Ukraine with some certain weaponry or not. If you Google Putin threatens West with nukes, you may find lots and lots of other speeches. I just showed you 3. I guess in total there should be around 50 of his interviews, statements and videos where he mentioned that. Some of the statements happened even before the full-scale war started. So it's the usual Russian policy to be this bully with a big nuclear bite, saying that I'm gonna hit you, I'm gonna hit you, because nuclear weaponry is the only thing that is left in Russia for them to feel strong. Well, do I think that Putin will never use nukes? No, I don't think he might use nukes, but it will not depend on whether West will support Ukraine or not, as we already see from this history of war. And again, now Russia has initiative. Their side is escalating. For example, the most recent escalation is the collaboration with North Korea. And if West will continue to watch like that, they're escalating. Should we do something? Okay, let's think what Ukraine also needs. ATACMS? No, maybe in 2 years. Fighter jets? No, let's give them 5 fighter jets, it's okay. So with this weak approach, dictators will finally prevail. Putin, Kim Jong-un, Xi Jinping and others, they see that West is damn weak, so they may start their own local wars. And our world simply may go into the total total chaos. After the Soviet Union collapsed, the world was stable. There were less wars, actually, because the most powerful army, the United States of America, was a guarantee factor for many of the allies. Now it's not like that. And dictators, as you can see, are well united against democracies. Actually, the Third World War has already been started. It's not yet in a hot stage all over the globe, just in Ukraine, but it is happening. There was also the information published yesterday from Le Figaro that other countries like UK and France gave their permission to use Storm Shadow or Scalp cruise missiles for Ukraine on the Russian territory. Well, later on Le Figaro deleted that article, but today we have one more confirmation from RBK Ukraine. They refer to Ukrainian military that definitely they have the approval to use those cruise missiles on the Russian territory. However, there still could be restrictions to use those just in the Kursk region. Now Ukraine officially has the modification with a range of 250 kilometers, which fully covers the Kursk region. But there was the information that Ukraine obtained the extended range modification of the Storm Shadow missile, with a 2 times longer range, and that may help Ukraine to strike many of the Russian military airfields and finally to get rid of the threat from the Russian aviation, as Ukraine did, for example, with the Russian Black Sea Marine Fleet, which is now scared to go to the open waters and was partially evacuated to the port of Novorossiysk and Feodosia. So because of the range, in a way, the Storm Shadow and Scalp cruise missiles permission is even more profitable for Ukraine to use on the Russian territory. And speaking about the information which is coming from the United States media sources, I think that because of the national security interests, it's better to stay calm about this topic. But Western media always speak about it, and in our turn we may also speak and comment those news. But obviously, like it was with the first HIMARS system supplied to Ukraine, Russia obtained the news that Ukraine got those HIMARS right at the battlefield. So at first they were used, and later media started to speak about it. Here somehow we have the news published in the media that Biden has decided something. It basically gives Russia more time to counteract, but of course Russia has its own intelligence, and I guess that they knew about Biden's decision in any case. But now Russia has to publicly react on the news. Alright, after the recent missile news, United Nations or Useless Nations Organization called to protect Russian civilians because the United States gave the approval for Ukraine to use those missiles. Wow, that's definitely the factor of escalation. But why are they not calling Russia to stop their attacks on Ukraine? Because there was the one yesterday, yes, after the long gap. It was one of the most massive Russian strikes on Ukrainian territory, which happened right after the German Chancellor Scholz spoke with Putin. Well, Russia could have planned this attack well before Scholz called to Putin, but the result is the same. You call Putin to negotiate, and Putin responds with a massive strike on Ukraine, using the weaponry which Ukraine has no in its army. Strategic bombers, cruise missiles, hypersonic missiles, advanced drones, and Ukraine finally has obtained the ATACMS permission after all of those almost 3 years of war. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, again guys, I'm happy about the decision, but for how long it will work? Donald Trump takes the office in a couple of months, but I think even for him it will be very difficult to cancel the current decision for ATACMS. Because in that case, he will be a military ally of Russia, definitely, because in that case, he will help Russia in a military way by canceling the critical tool for Ukrainian army. It's like basically destroying those ATACMS, because if you cancel that permission, they will not fly any longer. So it's kind of interesting decision from Joe Biden. Luckily, he gave that approval 2 months before he is leaving the office. And with this recent attack, again, Putin shows that it's just useless to speak with him. If you speak with Putin, it will be even worse. He will launch one more big strike to show that he's the boss here. Putin got all of the chances to cancel the preparation for this massive strike, but he didn't order so. The Russian regime itself is non-negotiable. And the faster our friends and allies understand that, the better it will be for them personally. And for Ukraine as well. And after all, guys, I would say that for the future perspectives, Ukraine have to rely on its own, just not to be restricted by any sort of the means. Like we know that Ukraine started to modernize the Neptune missile, which was already used not as the anti-ship missile but as the standard cruise missile. The range of 200 miles will also increase, and by the way guys, this is the legendary missile which hit the Russian Moskva ship and sank it down basically. Also we know that Ukraine is modernizing its Grom ballistic missile system. This system is the close comparator to the Russian Iskander and has the similar range. So I believe that in 2025 Ukraine will have its own robust solutions for the long-range targeting of the Russian whatever bases, infrastructure. The only thing that Ukrainian military production requires lots of the investments, and without the support again from our Western allies, those projects are just simply not possible. The pro-Russian channels are sharing the information from the spokeswoman of the Russian Foreign Ministry, Zakharova. She said that the response on a long-range systems approval to Ukraine will be imminent. Yeah, as usual, Russia threatens everyone, but how can they escalate even more? Easy nukes? Come on, who would believe that, at least at this stage? And you know, even today Kremlin spokesman Peskov said that Russia will not negotiate on the current front line, so Russia needs more ground, as they say. Well, what's the actual Russian plan? They want to put the territories which they were not able to occupy, like full Zaporizhia, Kherson Oblast, which they put already in their constitution. At least this is their initial goal. After some sort of the ceasefire agreement is signed, Russia will modernize its army and attack Ukraine once again. And that second attack will be well prepared by Russia because they learn on their own mistakes and they'll occupy Kiev 100%. Well, not just Kiev, but most of the Ukrainian territory. They will put their puppet government in charge and Ukraine will be no more. Why Ukraine is so important? Well, because it's the ally of the Western countries, the country which is going in the democratic way of the development. Now, because of the war, I would say that it is not the democratic country, no, but people decided before the vector of the evolution. Ukraine will not be with Russia. Ukraine is heading towards the European Union, Western civilization. So if Ukraine loses, the West loses as well. It will be very weak, so China will attack Taiwan 100%. As I've told you, there will be multiple of the conflicts, wars, there will be more nuclear weaponry, because countries will understand that it's the only mean which may protect you from the other country, and the hot third world war is imminent in that case. So the future of the world, of Europe especially, lies within Ukraine and how this war may develop. And we say that Russia again wants the Istanbul agreements to be implemented. According to those, Ukraine should give up its army basically to have not more than 80,000 soldiers, which is nothing really, judging on the scale of the current war. So in this case, Russia will 100% occupy all of the Ukraine with almost no resistance. Recep Tayyip Erdogan wants to propose his own peace plan on G20 summit in Brazil. By the way, Putin is not going for this summit. He is too scared. So he has some of the points, the program of the plan, and let me tell you why it will not work. Well, actually the Turkish side itself says that it's hard to achieve it. Well, at first they say that demilitarized zone will be created somewhere in Donbass. Alright, let it be. For example, the ceasefire is tomorrow. All of the sides stop shooting. This is the border, and let's say 20 kilometers to this area, 20 kilometers to this area, 40 kilometers zone is the militarized area. Super, but what this area solves? So why Russia won't just deploy their forces here and cover this distance in a matter of hours, like they did at the very beginning of the war? So it's not the barricade, it's not the huge fence or the wall, it's basically the free land which Russia may cover. Well, Erdogan also proposes the deployment of the international peacekeeping forces in Ukraine. But why Putin would agree on that? For him, it's not profitable. Well, actually, he might agree on that if those international forces will be his own soldiers or, for example, Belarus soldiers. But it will never happen like that. If United Kingdom or France, for example, would like to deploy their forces here as the peacekeepers, Russia will not allow it because they think that the territory of Donetsk is their sovereign territory For them, there is no difference actually between Donetsk and Voronezh Oblast, because they already put it in their constitution. So for them, the deployment of the international peacekeepers is the same as the intervention, again if we speak about the papers. Next, we have the continuation of the military support for Kiev. Continuation, but what kind of the military support will be provided? We're out of clue. Continuation of what? And why would Russia again agree on that? Because their goal is to demilitarize Ukraine according to the previous Istanbul agreements I've just said to you. Next, Ukraine undertakes not to join NATO for more than 10 years. More than 10 years, well, 100 years is also more than 10. And guys, as I've told you many of the times, there is no robust security guarantee for any sort of the pro-Western country or the Western country rather than NATO. It's the only solution for protection, for example, in this case for Ukraine against the Russian nuclear strikes. Without the NATO membership, Russia will always be the threat for Ukraine. It is the only solution possible. Without it, no peace deals will work. But it seems like our allies are not interested in Ukrainian membership for now. They may partially take Ukraine in NATO. For example, without Kherson, Zaporizhia, Donetsk and Luhansk Oblast, saying that if Russia escalates to other territory of Ukraine, NATO will respond. To the territories which are outside the Russian constitution, at least like that it could work, but without any security guarantees, Ukraine will fail in a long-term perspective if Russian regime continues to exist. For this reason, it's important for Ukraine and I think for the Western countries to deal with the Russian regime. Because after all, it's not just about Ukraine. Ukraine is just one puzzle of the big plan of Putin. He wants to restore the Soviet Union. It's the only goal. For this reason, Russia demanded some sort of the new strategy of security in Europe. They demanded all of those Eastern European countries to leave the NATO bloc, and they will continue to demand that. If Ukraine falls into Russian hands, Russia will use Ukraine to push west even more. Yeah, guys, this video is already kind of long one, so for the military map updates and for more news, I'll record one more video, hopefully tomorrow morning. For now, please don't forget to press your huge like to this video. By doing so, you help me a lot. And as usual, I wish you all a peaceful sky wherever you are, and have a great time.